Welcome everybody. My name is Kira Delaney. My company is Kira K Designs. I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat to my website. It's really easy. It's kirakdesigns.com. It's also how you find me on Instagram and Facebook and pretty much everywhere. And luckily enough, my name is unusual. So if you just remember Kira Knitting or Kira Crochet, you can find me pretty quickly. I am a pattern designer and also a teacher. I've been publishing patterns for 15 years. I was designing stuff before that, just not writing it down. And I've been teaching for 20 years, and I find that they go really nicely together. My teaching, I think, makes me a better designer, and my designing makes me a better teacher, and I really love doing both of them. And I'm here today for Stitches Expo at Home, and I'm going to be sharing some projects in lace. I do a lot of lace work, both knitting and crochet, and a fair amount is not what people think that they're going to do in lace when they get started. So I like to show some things that are a little easy, kind of geometric, nice ways to get into it. And I do have some very detailed lace in lace white yarns to show you as well. But if you've never done lace before, I suggest you start there. I suggest you start with something more like what I'm wearing, which is a little bit more geometric. This is considered a lace rib where everything stacks up. And it's also done in a worsted weight yarn, which means you can see your stitches and feel your stitches. And it's a lot easier to tell that you're doing it right because you can see that everything's stacked up. It's not a whole lot of stitches. It's not really fine yarn. So it kind of sets you up for success in lace. I actually suggest in general that you sorry, I'm just going to mute everyone. You're welcome to unmute yourself if you have something to say, but I just want to make sure that we don't get a lot of background noise. I also have the chat open if anyone wants to put anything in there. So as I was saying, in lace, I think that you don't want to start with really fine yarn and a whole lot of stitches your very first time. It can be lovely to get to that place. It's fine if you never get there and if that's not the kind of lace that you want. But even if you are going to do a project with a really fine yarn, swatching with a bigger yarn to learn the stitch pattern is a great way to go and a nice way to use up sort of leftovers of DK or worsted weight yarn, something you can see really nicely, to learn your stitch pattern. And I'd also suggest a lace that has something that you can visually follow. So I'm going to get on my tippy toes here. My sweater here is called the Concise Lace Cardigan. It is a cropped sweater. It's got an all-over lace pattern with a little shawl collar and a rib, and you can see it's a raglan done seamlessly from the bottom up. It's a great choice if you are wanting to do garments and have an all-over lace pattern without something that's going to be really fine or prone to snag on things as you walk around. So that's one that I like quite a lot. I wear a lot of dresses, so I like having a cropped cardigan over them. I'm going to go ahead and slide it off just because I've got some shawls and other things to show you, and this way I can try them on for you. I'm going to end up with a big pile of samples behind me because I've got a big pile of samples in front of me. All my patterns are available on my own website and on Lovecrafts and on Ravelry. A lot of them are available through webs and other venues. And I sell kits as well for many of my accessories where you can get the pattern with the right yarn, and if there are extra notions like buttons or beads or a special tool, they're in there as well. So this is a nice one. You're getting into lace. I'll go ahead and put it on, and then I've got a close-up camera so I can show you like that as well. It's called the Black Diamond Cowl, and it is a lace pattern done in a bamboo yarn. So you can see it's got this really lovely drape and flow. One great trick for lace, not that you have to do it, but it works really nicely if you choose a yarn that is drapey as opposed to elastic and springy and stretchy, because those yarns want to relax in the blocking process and they stayed blocked out. I have a similar one of these in an older yarn that I made many years ago. I blocked it once. I've worn it a lot. I've washed it since then, but I haven't had to reblock it because it just has stayed relaxed into the lace pattern. And I'm going to pop over to a different camera here so you can see the stitch pattern. Oops, let me adjust my lighting just a bit. There we go. You can see a little better. So this is a diamond lace pattern, not too tricky to follow. And again, this is not a teeny tiny yarn. This is about a sport weight yarn to a DK. It's kind of in that range. So you get to go through the pattern pretty quickly. And that tencel is just really lovely and drapey. As a very different option, this actually is a very stretchy, springy wool yarn. It's got a lot of give to it. I'll give you the edge here. This is called the Trinity Shawl. I used a gradient yarn. You'll be able to see that when I have it on the big camera again. with a contrast color at the edging here. And again, this is a lace where things stack up. You can see these columns, and those can make it a lot easier for you to track what's going on if you're new to lace, or just if you want something that you don't have to pay a whole lot of attention to. You can also see here, there's this really beautiful line here. These yarn overs are increases, whereas these yarn overs are paired with decreases, creating the lace stitching. And I'm going to show you that on a bigger version. Welcome everyone, I'm Kira of Kira K Designs, and I'm showing a lot of sample projects in lace, knitting and crochet. So far we've done knitting, we'll get a crochet up next. So this is the Trinity shawl. It's an unusual shape. It's really 3/4 of a square, which is not a very common shape for shawls, but it works really nicely because it comes over, it pins, it'll stay on without pinning because it just sort of hangs down between your arms here. If you want to, you can even take the tails and tie them behind your shoulders to make something kind of like a vest. In a really stretchy yarn, you still get a lot of range of motion for that. In this particular one, it's done from the top down. I have 2 sizes. This is the larger of the 2. The other one is a bit shorter, but it's also very simple just to keep going. If you want a larger size, or if you have a gradient yarn like this and you just want to use every single inch of it up, since there's a contrast color for the edge and the bind off, you don't have to worry about running out in that way. And you could just keep going as long as you wanted to do. So that's called the Trinity shawl. I have kits for this one. This is a naturally dyed Cornmeal wool yarn from Sincere Sheep. And the kits come with 1 gradient cake. This is pretty subtle, goes from a gray to a purple. And then there's also a contrasting color at the bottom. And of course the kit has a pattern as well. I always have both a printed copy of the pattern and also a code to download the PDF. So if you want it digitally, you can have that as well. All right, I want to make sure to show you some crochet. I'll kind of mix in the knitting and crochet. And let's get back into a garment showing lace. This is a tank top. It's called the abalone shell, and it is worked. It's actually an interesting construction. When you start crocheting it, you start right here, and you go upwards doing the bodice. This is in a half double crochet with just some simple shaping. And then once that's done, it's really easy to custom fit the shoulders and get the right length. Then you come back to the same part and work downwards to do the lace patterning. And this is a variation on a shell stitch. There's a lot of variations on shell stitches, and it gives it this really nice drape. This happens to be a bamboo yarn, which adds to the drapiness. And again, is a yarn that has drape and not elasticity, so it really blocks out beautifully and stays blocked out. So this is that stitch pattern. It's got a lovely flow because it's got so many open areas, and a naturally scalloped bottom edge when you get to the bottom. Because it's done in this direction from the middle up and then back to the middle and down, it's very adaptable too. If you want to lengthen it, you could. I've even seen somebody who turned this into a dress by shifting to a bigger hook every once in a while and just continuing until it's long enough. So she got an A-line effect to it. If anyone has any questions, I've got the chat open, or you're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask. If you come, if you do, you'll be recorded, but the way I've got it set up, I should be the one in the video. So next up, I've got a really graphic example of lace where it's just a small detail. This is a glove that's got a lace patterning that goes around. Switch cameras here for you. It is called the Helix gloves, and you can see there's one eyelet that travels all the way around and ends up on the index finger. And the matching glove, it travels the opposite direction, so it goes the opposite way. Only happen to have one with me right now. But that's a fun way where you can do just a little bit of lace, and it adds a lot of interest compared to if this was plain. If you're nervous about lace, something like that is great, where there's just the tiniest bit. Mostly for this, you're just knitting, but occasionally do your yarn over and your decrease. And the decrease varies depending on which side you're on. So let's look now at some things that are probably more what people think about with lace, working with really fine yarns. I've got a few examples of those. And again, it might not be the place to start, but certainly something to work up to. This is a crocheted shawl. It's called the Fretwork shawl. And this is done with a lace weight yarn. This particular one is a Cornmeal wool from Sincere Sheep, naturally dyed. So it's this beautiful kind of deep orangey red. Looks a little bit different on camera, but things tend to. And this is a shawl that's crocheted from the top down. And in the pattern instructions, I give you a chart as well as written instructions for starting, and also a chart and written instructions for the edging. If you haven't tried crochet stitch diagrams before, I would highly recommend checking them out because they really look like the shape that you're making. So when you're working on this and you're doing the edging at the bottom, you have a diagram in the pattern that looks a heck of a lot like this. It is this shape. It's not squished into a grid the way that knitting charts can be, and shows you exactly how each stitch lands on top of the stitches below it, which is a really nice graphic way of reading the instructions. They're also written out, so if you prefer it written in text, that's there as well. So this is called the Fretwork Shawl. It comes in 2 sizes, and this is the larger size, which is what the kit is for. There is a shawlette size, so if you prefer a small shawl, you can do 2 with the kit instead, because you get the pattern either way that has both sizes. This one is, you know, a nice voluminous shawl. It's almost 5 feet across, so it does come around, and you can see it's more than a triangle, so it's not flat on top, and those wings really help bring it in so it stays on nicely, long enough to tie, or it's another one that you could pull behind your shoulders and pin it or tie it there if you wanted to turn it into a little bit more of a vest. Welcome everyone who's new. I'm just going to pop my website into the chat again. And then I also set up a code if anyone's interested in kits. I set up a code for free shipping on kits through the end of the day this Friday. And I'm going to put that into the chat as well. I always do free shipping for orders over $100. So for anyone watching this recording, after that's expired, you still can get the free shipping if you'd like to. Let me pull out another one that is a lace weight yarn. I've got a range. I've got everything up to worsted weight here. But this is definitely the kind of thing people tend to think about when they're thinking about knitted lace. So here we go. So this is a very fine yarn. A whole lot of stitches, like you can even see me through it. And this is called the Little Sparrow Shawl. If you were to lay it flat on the ground, it's like a 3/4 circle, which means that it hangs really nicely. Let me actually shift this away a bit so you can see a bit more. Get up on my tippy toes. So it hangs really nicely. It is a lot of stitches, and this particular one is a tencel yarn, which is a little bit slippery. It's one where if you're newer to lace, maybe even if you're not, I would suggest doing a swatch in a bigger yarn so you can learn the stitch pattern. Like a lot of my lace, it is geometric. You can see there's this kind of constant column of stitches here, and that does make it easier to follow because you can see that things are stacking up, or you can use markers to track that as well. And I did try to simplify this a little bit in that the lace stitch pattern is just straight. There's no shaping in the lace. You're basically doing a rectangle of lace, and then all the shaping happens up here in this beautiful yoke, and that is done in a slip stitch pattern, and the decreases are hidden in there. So it's easier to knit than it looks. It's a lot of stitches, I'm not gonna lie. It's a small yarn, but it's not as tricky as people tend to think it is, and that's because I set it up to be a little bit easier to follow, both for folks who you know, need that, but also because I prefer knitting things that are a little easier. So you can see here, I've got the lace pattern. It's got this vertical line going on, and then all the shaping is up here in this slip stitch area, which really shows off the highlight and shadow of the yarn. It's getting a little blown out here because there's so much of my white cloth coming through. Obviously, my website at kirakadesigns.com has pictures of all of these as well. So this again is called the Little Sparrow Shawl. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's very popular at Stitches West when I was there earlier this year. And this particular one available in kits is a tencel yarn, hand dyed by Teresa Ruch. I just love the kind of swingy drape of this guy. All right, let's look at some garments again. I've got quite a few. I've got a big stack of stuff on the table here. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions or want to hear something again. This is one that is one of my first ever sweater designs. So this is circa 2007. It's called the Side Impact Sweater. And it's called that because it's got this band of lace that goes on the side. This is from the armpit down. And then a similar band of lace that happens up the sleeve and up into the neckline. It's a little funnel neck. So most of this, you're just knitting, right? So most of this, it's stockinette, and then all the interest is happening at the side. So once around or twice around on the body, you have a little bit of lace, but it is, again, pretty geometric. You've got two little columns of lace rib, and then the arrow pattern down the center. So it's not super tricky to do, and it adds a lot of interest for that. This one as well has a crochet edging. So you can see here, it looks like stockinette stitch and knitting that just ends without a big rib or garter stitch or anything like that. It's a really nice finish, I think, for stockinette, and ends up kind of getting knitters to do just a little bit of crochet, which is something I'm always sort of trying to tempt people into, because there's so much you can do with crochet. And often people knitting a thing with a little bit of crochet on the edge is a good way to get them into doing more crochet in the future. So here's a close-up of that with the patterning. You can see the crochet border, and then you can see the lace in here as well. This is the side of the body inset. The same lace is going up the side of the sleeve and up through the neck. And that's a construction I use pretty frequently, where this is done, the sleeve is done in the round up to the armpit. The body is done in the round up to the armpit. They are seamed together through, that one's a saddle shoulder. And then the neckline is done seamlessly from the bottom up as well. So some seams where I think they're needed for structure, and skipping any seams like side seams that I think you can get away without having in this case. All right, I'm gonna pull out, try not to cause an avalanche as I'm grabbing things from the middle of my stack here. Well, another garment, this one's a skirt. I really love knitted skirts because they are, as a friend of mine says, secret pajamas. Feels like you're wearing pajamas, you've got elastic waist on, but you look dressed up. So this is one of my favorites. It's called the Sawtooth skirt. And you can see here, it's in stockinette. There's just a little detailing with the decreases in here. This is, you know, I misspoke. The increases, this one's done from the top down. And then the lace edge is worked sideways as a separate piece and attached to the skirt at the bottom. And you can see it's got a little bit of a flare because of the way that it's fit in there. And because this eyelet pattern here gives it a lot of movement, it really lets it kind of flounce and move around when you're walking. I've worn this to yarn shows like Stitches West and get stopped a lot when I'm walking through the aisle. So let me show you a detail of that. If you haven't tried a skirt, they're really lovely because, like I mentioned, they're comfy and dressy at the same time, but also they're a lot simpler than sweaters. So if you're new to garment knitting and you're a little worried about it, skirts are great because they are less complicated to fit and have less pieces, so generally less finishing than a full sweater, and less time, less yarn, all that good stuff. All right, if anyone has questions, feel free. I'm happy just to talk for an hour, but I'd also love to hear if anyone has a question.
Don't you find it difficult with skirts to fit them to larger ladies because of them bumping out on bigger butts?
You know what? I actually think that it's easier to fit a skirt than a sweater in general. There are fewer points of the body on which it needs to fit or where it hangs from. So my skirts, I've got 6 patterns, 5 of them are knit, and 4 of those have an elastic waist, as does my crochet one. And so what I suggest, and this is written in the patterns, is you choose your size based on what we generally call a hip measurement, but really I would say it's a hip and or booty measurement, depending on where your widest part is. So for me, that's right around the widest part of the booty. Some people it's a little lower on the hip, depending on how their body's shaped. So you want to choose your skirt size based on that. So there's room for you at whatever the widest part is. And then you can adjust the skirt in at the top with elastic waist. I do build in shaping there as well. And it's a pretty easy thing to adjust. So if you do have sort of a bigger difference from your hip to your waist, you could start with a couple fewer stitches, you know, a couple inches. You can calculate that pretty easily and add in a few more increases in the same way that I have the increases built in there. If you're somebody who has just a booty that really sticks out, you might want to look into short row shaping so that you can keep the back hemline even by having a few more rows to kind of go through that extra curve outwards. It's similar to shirt row shaping for a full bust. You would just have it for the booty. I don't have that built in because generally with the knitted fabric, it stretches enough, and especially with something like this sawtooth skirt where you've got that weight at the bottom, that generally makes it work out. But there certainly are, a variety of bodies, and some people might want to add that in. If you take a look at these skirts, there's probably some on Instagram. I know there's a ton on Ravelry, so if you can look on Ravelry, I've got some of these have a lot of people who've made them in a lot of different sizes, and I actually think they look great on people who have a curvier body. And then let's see, there's a question, the name of this is called the sawtooth skirt. So I have quite a few skirt patterns. This is one of them, and one of the more popular ones. It's got a lot of projects out there. And I'm just gonna pop my website in to the chat again for anyone who wants to click to look over. I've got patterns for everything I'm showing, and a lot of the accessories have kits as well. I don't do kits for the garments because with a range of sizes and colors, I would need a really big yarn store to be able to offer that. But for accessories where it's not too much yarn or not a lot of sizes, I do have kits. So this is kind of a fun one that uses lace in a surprising way. It is a hat. I'll go ahead and put it on. And I started with this with a crocheted motif pattern. So like something you might have used for a doily back in the day, or maybe now. And that's the top center of the hat. And then that increases outwards. And I ended up going into double crochet for most of it. So it gives you just a little bit of lace in a place where it's probably not going to affect the warmth of the hat, but gives you a little bit more interest. In this particular one, I've got a crochet rib on there, and I put a little bit of elastic on the inside. Because this is an alpaca yarn, it doesn't have as much memory. So, and crochet ribs aren't quite as stretchy as a knitted rib, so I went ahead and did that at the beginning. This is also a trick you can use if you have a hat that's sort of relaxed a little bit, maybe due to the yarn choice, or just, sometimes things go through the wash wrong and kind of lose some elasticity. That really thin elastic thread comes in lots of colors, and it's a great trick to add a little bit more spring. I've also used that for things like sweater cuffs that ended up belling out over time. The elastic thread can pull them in so you get a little bit more wear. All right, and that one, I don't think I mentioned it. That one's called the Rose Window Slouch, because the top of this reminds me of those stained glass rose windows where they're kind of radiating out from the center. Usually a lot more colorful than this, but sometimes I've got colorful hair peeking through. This is another fun one where it's just a little bit of lace adding a whole lot. I call these the medallion gloves. So you can see here there is a little diamond medallion on the back. You can always skip it if you want to just do a plain finger glove, or if you want to simplify the fingers, you could just do this straight across instead. I tend to add in a little bit more complexity, knowing that you can simplify more easily than adding it. So this is just a fun little bit of something interesting on the back of these medallion gloves. All right, let's look at a little bit more crochet. There we go. I've got an interesting garment for you. This is a little shrug. It is called the tricolor shrug. Make sure I get the right side of it here. And this is done in a V stitch. So it gives you a lace effect. It's not actually sure that I would technically call it lace, because generally lace is a combination of increases and decreases. But it gives you this really nice little pattern. I'll put it under the close-up camera too. And this one's fun because I did it with 3 different colors of yarn, working one row or one round, depending on where you are, stripes. So you can see there's the back of it. It's a nice stash buster if you have a lot of fingering weight yarns. You don't have to have a sweater quantity of anything, because first of all, it's a small sweater being a shrug. I do have different sizes, of course, but regardless of the size, it's not a full long sleeve kind of a thing. And because you're mixing the colors, it doesn't take a whole lot of any of them. I've also done some versions of this where I was working with a scraps. So odds and ends, mini skeins. I just picked 3 main colors and grabbed everything I had in that range. And my testers did a lot of different combinations too. I had some people who did solid, some who did variegated, some who did speckly yarns, someone else who did scraps, and then some people who did this idea of 3 colors and a pretty wide range of different colors. All right. And that one, I think I did mention it's called the tricolor shrug. So this is actually one of my very first patterns. So it's about 20 years old. I still like it a lot. It is called the filigree scarf, and it uses this lace rib that, as you can see, it's very geometric. It really goes in columns, which is lovely if you're on the newer side. It's also a DK weight yarn, so it is not teeny tiny. If you're new to lace, that's always a good thing to go with something that you'll be able to see and feel a bit better. And this is one where it's got two distinct sides. If you look close, you can see this is a bit of a thicker column there with the two knits in the middle. And on the other side, just a little bit different, but they both look good. You don't have to worry about placing your scarf on your body with a certain side out. And this is a great one if you're really new to lace and you're super nervous. This is nice. Bigger yarn, not a big piece since it's just a scarf, and you can really, really see that things are lining up and know that if it's not working, you'll probably see it pretty quickly and be able to go back and fix it. One tip too for in general, but especially in lace, and especially in lace where it's harder to see the pattern, is to put in a lifeline. I've got a video on my YouTube channel if anyone wants to see how it works. But the basic idea is when it's working, when you know things are good and you know where you are, you take a very, very fine yarn. I usually use leftover lace weight yarn. Embroidery floss works great. I wouldn't do sewing thread or dental floss because they could cut your yarn depending on what it's made out of. And you thread it up and you add it in to all the stitches right where your knitting needle is. If you're on a circular needle, some of them have a little space where you can thread it through. Otherwise, you take a darning needle and just add it. So you run this small thread through all your stitches, and then you continue your knitting. And if anything goes wrong later on, you could try to fix it, but you've got a backup plan that you could unravel down to the safety line and it will stop unraveling at that point. You will have all your stitches. You will know what row you're on if you either made a note or put it in a particular place, like the end of the repeat. And I find that people with that backup plan, that kind of added insurance against mistakes, are less likely to make mistakes because they're not as worried. And they're going to be more successful trying to fix something up above because they know that all will not be lost if something goes wrong. Worst case is they go back to their safety line. So again, if you want to see that in motion to give it a try, I've got a video on my YouTube channel, and you can find that pretty easily just based on my name. All right, so I've got some more lace. This is another crochet one. This is a great one for crocheters who are new to lace or a little nervous about lace. The main body of this has two different lace patterns. There's a lace mesh that's this really open one, and then this geometric lace here. And it's finished off with a little scalloped bobble at the edge at the top there, which also gets done at the bottom. This is called the Rose City Cowl. I'm going to show you a close-up of it. And this particular one is done in a tencel yarn, hand-dyed by Teresa Ruche. Tencel and bamboo and things like that are really lovely for lace because they want to relax and block out and stay blocked out. And I've got it in a lot of different colors and kits. And again, and actually not necessarily again, for folks who haven't just joined us, I set up a code for free shipping that'll work for kits on my website through the end of the day on Friday. And I just put it into the chat. And this one, you can see it's pretty simple lace and you get two different patterns. So you get to practice those. The baubles are just a bit trickier, but they happen at the end. So at that point, usually you're ready for something a bit more interesting. And as usual on my patterns, I have the instructions are both written and charted in a stitch diagram so that you get the visual instructions as well as the written one. You can follow whichever one you want, but the other one can be really helpful there to, if you get stuck, it might be helpful to get you unstuck. Or if you're up for a challenge, you can try the version of the instructions that you're not as used to and see how it works for you. Now this one's a really fun one. This is called the Sea Star Shawl, and it's made up of lace motifs. So you can see these are individual star patterns. They are joined as you go. It's done modularly, so there's no seaming at the end. After you do the first one, the second one is joined onto it, and the third one is joined onto that, and so on. And sometimes they're joined to multiple ones that already exist. And even if this is looking a little complex, based on the crocheting you've done, the nice thing is that you repeat it. So even if the first star or two is a bit of a struggle, you just keep making stars and they get easier and easier. And eventually you might even get it memorized. And this one's kind of an interesting shape. The shape is similar to a Faroese shawl, where it's got a flat bottom and then these little sort of wings that come off the side. It's a really easy shape to wear because it just drapes really nicely. This particular one is the smaller size, and this is what my pattern, or sorry, this is what my kit has. It's got a gradient cake. So you can see it kind of goes through, this is the beginning of the cake, and it goes through all this stuff through the back, and you end up with the other end of the gradient cake. And the pattern for this has the star is written and charted, and there's also a diagram that shows you the order in which to do the stars if you are using a gradient. If you're using just one yarn or scraps, you can put them together however you want to. But if you like the idea of the gradient that sort of flows across, then there's a map in a way in the pattern. So that's called the Sea Star Shawl. And the yarn for that one was from Houndstooth Fiber Arts, who has also been a vendor at Stitches. All right, let's see, let's look at some of the beads now. Beads are similar to lace, something that I think is really fun and adds a lot of interest. So I'll show you a close-up of this in a minute so you can see the beads a bit more. They're a little subtle, but you can kind of see little pops of sparkle in there. This one is called the Luminous Scarf, and it is a pretty simple lace rib, another one that's good if you're new to lace, or if you're not new to lace, it's one that gets pretty quickly memorized. So you're working this way, short rows, lots of them. It's a pretty long scarf, so it's a good one if you like to double things up, you can. Or you can just wrap and have it be super dramatic if you want. Oh, good, here in this light you can see the beads a lot more. So the beads just kind of sit in the lace. This particular color combination, they remind me of little drops of dew just kind of sparkling in there. And the kits for this have this tencel yarn. It's another one from Teresa Ruche, who does a lot of tencels and bamboos. And in the kit bag, I also have the glass beads and a beading needle for putting the beads on. This particular one, you do string the beads in advance, and then they're popped onto the yarn overs as you're knitting. This one is knitted, Beth. Yep, and it's called the Luminous Scarf. Then I have a different knitted lace scarf pattern. Also a lace rib, I'll leave this one on here as well, but a different pattern. In this particular one, the beads are not pre-strung. You use a small crochet hook and pop them onto each stitch as you go. Some people really prefer the flow of that. So you can see the beads in here, and the kit has the beads as well as the crochet hook to put them on. It's one of the tiny steel hooks that you might use for crocheting doilies. They're not as common these days, so I don't expect people to have those. So really all you need for this would be your knitting needles, and everything else, either kit is in there. This particular yarn is a hand-dyed alpaca from Black Diamond Alpacas. They're an alpaca ranch near me in California. Really just beautiful, high quality, super soft alpaca. It is from a small farm. I never find bits of hay or stuff in there. And then one of the ranchers does the dyeing. So you get a really lovely kind of highlight and shadow effect. I'd call this a semi-solid or a tonal hand dye. So you've got something going on, but it's not a strong variegated yarn that might hide the pattern. So this is called the Radiant Scarf. And this is the Luminous Scarf. Both pretty simple, nice introduction to lace and or beads. Not as hard as they look. And both are available as kits as well as just the pattern on its own. All right, so that was some knitting. Let's talk about crochet again. I do both, and I think it's important to show both of them kind of interspersed. So this is another one that if you lay it flat, it's almost a 3/4 circle, which is a shape that I've talked about already because I really like how things hang if they come over the shoulders as opposed to being just straight out. Stays on a little bit better. I've worn this when I'm a vendor at events, and I'm always like going up to the top shelf and down onto the floor, and it stays on really nicely. This is called the Ice Crystals Capelet. And you can see here it's got these little kind of snowflake reminiscent designs at the bottom. I happen to do this in a gradient yarn. So you start at the top and you're heading down towards the bottom and ending up with those little motifs. And as usual, The patterns are both written and charted. So both the beginning of it and the very end with the patterning are done in, sorry, let me see if I can fix this light to show that better. There we go. So both the beginning and the edging are done in a diagram as well as written, which makes it a whole lot easier to follow. I often find too, when I'm teaching patterns like this, the people who are nervous about the edging at the beginning, by the time they get there, they're feeling, more confident and ready for it because we end with the edging as opposed to starting with the trickiest part. And this one, I do have kits for this in a lot of different colors. So I believe I still have 1 or 2 available in this particular color, but I've got lots of different options, warm tones, cool tones, a really bright rainbow, all kinds of things for that. So it's called the Ice Crystals Capelet, and that one is crochet. Here's another one that's crochet that's kind of fun because it's a very open lace where there's almost more air than fabric in here, which gives it this really nice movement and also means it doesn't take up a whole lot of time or a whole lot of yarn. This one I call the negative space shawl, sorry, negative space wrap, and there is a scarf version as well. This particular one, it's an alpaca, so it's super warm even with that openness. It keeps you really toasty. And it's kind of a fun pattern. Nice if you are on the newer side of crochet and want to practice some new stitches. We've got here some increases and decreases, and it's a nice one to sort of figure out how to read the instructions and sort of land things where they're supposed to be, because again, it's pretty graphic and it looks like the diagram. So that's called the negative space wrap. And there is a scarf. It's one pattern, you get them both. So the name of the pattern is actually the negative space scarf and wrap. And you can see how it's skill level 1. If you're on the newer side, it would be a fine match for that. So here's another one. This is a knitted sweater. I'll hold it up so you can see the whole sweater. But this is one where we've got a pattern that is a little bit of lace. So we're mostly talking stockinette, and a little bit of lace running down the front and also the sleeves. This one too has some beads in the hem. So this is a crocheted hem at the bottom of the knitted fabric with the beads on there to give it a little bit of interest and even a little bit of weight. This is called the eyelet twist pullover. So this is the front of it with that kind of double helix sort of diamond lace going up the front. The same pattern goes up the sleeves and ends up in the neck. So this is another saddle shoulder similar to the side impact sweater from earlier, where the pattern goes up into the neck and the seaming is minimal. So on this particular one, the seams are just along the saddle shoulder and the armhole, and that's it. Everything else is seamless. And I have seen some people do this without the funnel neck and just finish it as a crew neck at the top. So that's a really easy alteration. And this is one too where it's a bigger yarn. If you're new to lace, a little bit of lace and a bigger yarn makes it give you a lot of interest without a whole lot of extra effort on your part. Not that effort is bad. Right, let's look now at some stuff that is a little bit more effort. Let's look at some really lacy lace. This is called the Gossamer Lace Shawl, and this is the larger of the 2 sizes. So I'm gonna hold it up. It is a big one. There is a smaller size as well that's more of a shawlette. And this is again that Faroese style shawl where it is truncated at the bottom, it's straight across. The lace panel stays the same the whole time. And then all the shaping is done on the side in these little sort of wing shapes. It is yet again one where you've got a vertical going on with the lace. It's a form of a rib. So I find that pretty easy to follow by eye. And this one you start at the top and you're increasing as you go. So it's really easy to adjust to be either the size you want or to use all of your yarn and just stop when you have enough to bind off. This particular one is a cashmere silk blend that's really lovely and super soft and warm, even though it's very, very open and thin. It holds in a lot of body heat because it's got a little bit of that fuzz to it. And fuzzy yarn isn't always a great choice for lace, but here it is an open enough lace that you can still see the stitch quite nicely. So you can see here, I've got the two different things going on. This is the back panel, which is a little bit more complicated. You might want to use a row counter to track that. And then most of the shawl, these little wing shapes, are done in this pretty simple lace pattern that you've got a vertical, so you can see that it's stacking up. It's a lot of stitches. It does take some time, but even within that, it's not super tricky patterning to track. And that's really just based on my own preference. I don't like to have to look at the instructions to figure out every stitch on every row. I like to get sort of establish something and be able to see where things go, whether they're stacked up or kind of moving out and in again. I like to be able to see where they're going to land. So this is a great example of that ladder. This one is called the River Bend Shawl. There's a shawlette size on the pattern as well. And this is sort of a crescent shape. It's got some short rows up at the top to give it a little bit of a curve. And this is one where the lace pattern has this lovely zigzag line, so you can really see that it's stacking up nicely. This particular one, I used a gradient yarn, and it starts at the bottom, so it does start with a lot of stitches. There's no shaping in the lace though, so you're not worrying about increasing or decreasing or changing stitch counts in the lace. All of that is done at the top. There's some short row shaping that's done within this linen stitch border, and the linen stitch itself pulls it in a little bit, but then the short row is what's creating this curve. Yep, so I used here a gradient yarn, and I end up throwing in a mini skein. You can see it's a little darker at the top to finish it up at the end. That one I do not have kits for, but the yarn is available. It's a sincere sheep yarn, and I do have that yarn in some other projects, including ones I've shown already. There's another gradient one. They're really fun to do. This one is called the Stratiform Shawl. It's a knitted shawl done from the top down. And it's one I designed years ago because people would come often actually at Stitches West into my booth, and they'd say, I want to make the first shawl, but I'm really nervous. And they were looking at things that were all over lace, and they wanted lace, but it seemed like too much. So I designed this with that in mind. It is bands of stockinette and then a pretty simple lace with a little garter stitch in between. So it's not super hard lace, and it's not lace all the time. And this is another one where there are beads on the hem, which add a lot of interest. In this case too, they add just a little bit of weight to the bottom, so it helps it hang really nicely. So I'll put this under the close-up camera. This one is done with a gradient yarn from Houndstooth Fiber Arts, and I do have kits for it, which have the pattern as well as the yarn and the beads and the beading needle that you need to put the beads there on the bottom. So that's called the Stratiform Shawl. And this particular one is a knitted pattern. And welcome, I see I've got some new folks. I'm just going to pop my website into the chat and also a code that I set up for free shipping on kits through the end of Friday. I always do free shipping for orders over $100 though, so if you miss this or see it later, no worries. This is another one that is a bit more complicated than it looks. Often when people look at this, they ask me if it's some form of entrelac, because I'll show you in the close-up. It looks like the stitches sort of shift over back and forth, but that's just a factor of how the lace is made. This is called the Switchback Cowl, and I called it that because of those turns in the pattern. And what's going on here is that you have, actually, I've got it upside down here. You have decreases that are creating this path. So this is kind of the switchback. It reminds me of driving up mountain roads. And the reason that these are shifted, see these stitches go that way, these go that way, is because the decreases are paired with yarn over increases, creating the lace, but they're not right next to each other. Often we place those next to each other, and if we don't, the stitches in between sort of tilt from side to side. So I think this one's really fun. It's quite impressive, but it's another one that after you've done a couple of repeats, hopefully you can track it visually by following this little line and seeing that it never kind of staggers off to the side. And this particular one is a super soft alpaca yarn from a ranch near me in California, hand dyed by one of the ranchers. And it's really just lovely and soft and warm and fun to knit. If anyone has any questions, feel free. I'm just gonna have a sip of water because I've been talking a lot. Got about 15 minutes left. I still have more in my big stack of samples, so we'll keep going. Next one up is a hybrid crochet, which is also called Tunisian crochet. This design I call the Wind and Sea shawl, and it is a big shawl. You can see it's an off-center triangle, so a little asymmetric. And it's done in multiple colors. So there's one solid color, which is a full skein. And for this sample, I've got a set of 6 mini skeins that sort of go through a little gradient. A gradient yarn would work as well. I have other samples of this that show a variegated yarn here and then a solid mixed with it. So this is the bigger of 2 sizes. It's really squishy, so you can kind of bundle it up if you want to, but it's also plenty big enough to wrap around your shoulders and pin or tie, or just kind of fling an end over if you want to. So you can see that there. And if anyone hasn't tried the hybrid crochet, I actually taught it this weekend for stitches at home. It is a pattern, or sorry, it's a technique where you use a longer crochet hook, and every row has 2 passes. You do a forward pass from your dominant side, so for me that's the right, to your non-dominant side, picking up loops on your hook, and you do a return pass working them off. And so in this case, I've got stripes going on. At other parts in the shawl, it's just a single color, so you just get the texture. But in this particular lace pattern, it gives you this really lovely little design. I especially love how it looks in the mixed colors. It's a fun one to do. And then I also have, based on the way that I increased and decreased, this little kind of, it's not quite a scalloped edge, it's sort of like a stair step edge, but gives it a little bit more interest as well, and is an easy way to increase. And I've got another crochet shawl. I'm going to show you the bottom of it here because this is probably the most exciting part of it. So this is called the Belle Epoque shawl. So I just keep adjusting my lighting depending on what I'm showing. It needs a light on or off. This is a crocheted shawl that's done from the top down, and this is the very bottom center point that you'll see when I hold it up. It's got some lace accents and little eyelet rows throughout, and then this really lovely lace edging, which includes some baubles and some picots. This is called the Belle Epoque shawl. It's one that's been out for a while. There are a lot of versions of it in the world. I've seen a lot of samples in yarn shops, which is always nice. And this is the larger of 2 sizes. There's a smaller one as well. So this is one that I usually would wrap around my shoulders, whereas the other one I could do that, or I might wear it backwards like a scarf. And as usual, the pattern is both written and charted. And I've had a lot of people actually do this particular one who mostly knit and have done a little crochet, but this has tempted them into crocheting a whole piece. And I just think that's really fun to get people to try different crafts. I like to do pretty much all the fiber crafts. I was just doing a weaving workshop in the last couple of days as a student, which is good for me as a teacher to do that sometimes. And I kind of like that that one is tempting knitters into crochet. All right, next up, we've got a garment that's another example of a little bit of lace doing a lot of work. This is the back of a cardigan. It's called the diamond back cardigan. And there is a related diamond back top that's more of a t-shirt style. In this one, it's a pretty simple cardigan on the front, but then when you turn around, you've got this lovely lace detail, and there's a little texture inside the lace as well. I'll put it on the close-up camera. And that one is done from the top down seamlessly. So you start up in the raglan yoke and establish this design on the back, and then work downwards. After you finish the body, you go back and finish the sleeves, and then do the edging on the very front. And you can see inside the diamond of the lace is this little double moss stitch band, and then that's also repeated at the bottom of the cardigan and on the front in the button band. All right, got a bit of time left. I've got a few more things to show you. Let's pop in another one in crochet. This is called the Channel Islands cowl. In this particular one, I did a variegated yarn just to show how that would look. I don't always like a variegated yarn in crochet, but this one with the lace, I think that it worked pretty nicely, especially because it is a tonal variegated yarn. It's shades of the same color as opposed to multiple colors at once. It's actually really hard to see the color in that close-up, so let me hold it up. Actually, I'll go ahead and put it on. This is called the Channel Islands Cowl. This is the larger of two sizes. And it's got this really interesting pattern where it's sort of like a diamond open work lace, and then sometimes you fill in a diamond with a bobble. So there's a bobble in the middle of what they call a cluster stitch. That's really just lovely and fun and a little unusual. I've been doing knitting and crochet for most of my life, and I love when I find techniques that I haven't done before because it's infinite. There's so much out there, but it makes it more fun for me and hopefully for you too to do that. This one I would definitely consider in the intermediate, definitely intermediate lace category. I wouldn't do it for your first ever lace. But if you've done a little bit, it could be a fun one to challenge yourself with. If you are a new crocheter and you want to do a little bit of lace and you really like the idea of a lace weight yarn, this is one that I recommend. It's called the Terraced Vineyard Wrap, and there is a scarf option as well. And so in this one, it is very geometric. You can see things stack up. My particular sample here is a gradient yarn, and that's what I've got available in kits if you want a kit, because that keeps me at least interested as I go through lots of stitches, lots of rows. Having the color change there kind of keeps me excited and wanting to move on to the next bit. But it's really a nice rhythmic pattern, not too tricky. And because it's a lot of stitches and you start with a lot on there, rather than having you do a foundation chain and work into your foundation row, I have it set up, and this is in the pattern, to do a row of foundation single crochet instead, because that is a whole lot easier to count all those stitches than if you're doing the chain, and just a little easier for you to work as well. All right, I've got another one here that I'll just pop onto the close-up camera. It's another one that's great if you want a little bit of lace and not all over lace. This is a shawl design where we have some increases done with yarn overs. So you're getting just a little bit of that open effect here, but these are actually shaping the shawl at the same time. And then a couple of diamond repeats as you get towards the bottom. It's interesting, this camera color sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I think it depends a bit on the texture of the yarn as well as the color. This is this beautiful plum color. This is another one that uses that small farm alpaca from the ranch that's out near me. I've met these alpacas. I've fed them treats. They know their names. They don't always listen. It depends on if you're offering them something or yelling at them. But this shawl just has a little bit of lace at the bottom, and mostly it's stockinette. So it's another one that I designed based on people wanting to do lace shawls but feeling a little nervous about them. So you get to do some lace, and the diamond lace is at the end. So by then you're a little bit more comfortable with it. You've done lots of yarn overs for your shaping, so it's not super tricky to do. And it's another time that I've got the instructions both written and charted, so that you have the choice of which one to follow, or if you get stuck reading the chart, the written instructions might help you, or vice versa. All right, I almost reached the bottom of my stack. Thanks for everyone who's been hanging out. I have a lot of lace projects. You're looking at 15 years worth of patterns. I have a lot that are not lace, but it's something that I really enjoy doing. So this last one I got here is, again, it's actually the same yarn as the last one, but in a crochet design. So this is a fingering weight alpaca, and I've set it up as a gradient. This is not a gradient yarn. It is some full skeins, and I've wound off some partial skeins as well. And this one starts at the top. You're increasing, you can see these chain increases there, and get down to this really beautiful edging. This one is a 3/4 hexagon shape. So you can see it's not the same as a triangle. You've got more corners on there, but it's a really kind of unusual one. I like exploring different shapes in my shawls. And this one has a lovely edge to it. I think lace is one of the major strengths of crochet. It's great at doing really firm structural things like hat bills and stuff where you really want that structure. And it's also lovely in a really open, airy lace. And this is an example where when you get to this edging, there's almost more air than yarn in a lot of these sections. And this kind of big openness, it's really hard to do in knitting, but crochet does it very beautifully. And this is one where we've got picots on the edge. So when you block it, you'll be using a whole lot of pins. And actually, let me talk a little bit about blocking since I've got a few minutes left. Blocking is something a lot of people don't like to do. I kind of was swatching too, but they're two things that I strongly believe in. I've got videos on my YouTube channel on how to both steam block and wet block under tension. So there's 3 different videos because they're all pretty different. With most laces, I'm going to suggest the last one of wet blocking under tension, which means that you're kind of pulling and pinning your fabric down into a surface that can accommodate the pins. That's going to open up your lace. When lace is fresh, it doesn't look very good. It looks kind of crumpled because whether you're knitting or crocheting, lace is done with increases and decreases. So you're sort of creating this texture. And when you do a wet block, you get it totally wet and then spread it out and back it up. Get it totally wet, pull out a lot of the water. I like to roll my piece up in a towel and let it hang out, kind of wick out a lot of water. And then when you spread out, you're pulling and pinning to hold it in place. And that opens up the lace and kind of holds it open as it dries. It is a transformative process. I've blocked hundreds of lace things at this point, and pretty much every time I finish and I kind of step back from it and go, ooh, that looks really good. And I knew it was going to happen, but it's still a pretty amazing transformation. Similarly, if you're working on lace and someone says, oh, what are you looking at? You don't want to show it to them all crumpled up the way it is. What I usually do is I kind of stick some fingers in there and open it up to sort of mimic what it's going to look like when it's blocked. This one, of course, is blocked, so it isn't as big of a change. But you can do that even when you're looking at your lace to see if it's looking good, if it's working. If you're having trouble seeing that through line, kind of stretching it open with 4 fingers and almost like corners of a rectangle will make it easier for you to see where things are and to see how beautiful it is before you're done. You can always, of course, make a swatch first and block your swatch, possibly to check gauge, but also just to learn the stitch to make sure it looks good with your yarn and to have that reassurance for yourself that you're doing it right, especially if you have a pattern that is a little harder to see before it's been blocked. All right, well, thank you everybody for hanging out with me. This is going to be up on my YouTube channel. You might be watching it in the future there. I put my website in the chat again, but it is kirakdesigns.com. And I've got all my patterns are available as patterns. They're also available at, many of them, the ones that I mentioned, are available as kits where you can get the yarn and the pattern and any extras like buttons or beads all right in there. And then I do private lessons, both virtually and in person here around Oakland, California. So if you want a little bit of help and some virtual hand holding as you get started, that's always something that we can do as well. All right, any questions? Quiet group today? All right, well, thanks so much for coming and watching. I appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you at another event in the future. I'll be a vendor at Stitches SoCal this fall, as well as Stitches West in the spring. And through the online events as well. I just got my contract for teaching at Stitches at home in August, so I will continue showing up through these events as well. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye.